The chief. Really?
Let's say, is Ray here still? No.
So where does your daughter
That's the way.
Gosh, this is really hard. I can't see their faces. I don't know if they're looking at me here.
They're all staring at you.
It's a new area.
Orientation, July 26th and 27th.
Oh, how's it going?
Do you want this
Doing well,
to?
thank you.
Do you want mine?
Soccer's almost over.
No.
That's new and exciting. Our last game tomorrow night in Bartlett. And then we just had tryouts last week. Last week? Yeah, last week.
Oh, really?
So she made the U16 team. And then we try out for Illinois Premier Alliance, which is in Schaumburg, Arlington Heights. We try out for them Monday night. So yeah, so. Yes, yeah.
That's why he can't on mine.
Of course, of course. Now, do you coach that one as well?
Yeah,
You do? That's a Lightning, right?
Oh. That's a big word.
Oh, I didn't know you were Batavia. I thought you were here.
It's a price we work through. If I leave next Friday,
Very nice.
or if I leave the following Friday.
That's true. That is true.
I wasn't encouraged.
They're all good, though.
Sunday because I posted it on Facebook.
Tomorrow, I mean Friday. That's what I
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Special Committee of the Whole meeting, June 6, 2018. Prior to the start of our meeting tonight, I'd like to ask anyone who would like to speak to the council as a part of the public. You are certainly encouraged to do so. There are speaker request forms in the back of the room, and we would ask that you give those to our Deputy City Clerk, who tonight is Carrie Parker, and I would ask Carrie to make the roll call, please.
Jacobson? Fanouken?
Here.
Marquardt?
Here.
Fagan?
Here.
Noriko?
Here.
Verbeck?
Here.
Favor? 5 present. Oh, I'm sorry, Smith?
Here.
6 present.
Thank you. I have been advised that Alderman Favor will be out of town and will not be joining us tonight. I have not heard from Alderman Jacobson. I would expect him to perhaps arrive shortly. First of all, is there any public participation of anyone in the audience who would like to speak to one of the items on the agenda tonight? If not, we have a number of considerations as we move forward with this budget workshop. The first is a review of budget schedules and goals, a service level review, Public Works Department, and I'd ask our Public Works Director, Tim Holdeman, to speak to this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and City Council, it's an honor to be here tonight to share with you some of the aspects of Public Works. The Public Works responsibility is really centered around okay. We'll wait till Mark gets the right presentation there. Yeah. The Public Works responsibility is really centered around managing our city-owned assets and equipment in a way that creates and maintains a safe, healthy, and attractive environment. The icons shown on this slide represent several of the assets that we manage in Public Works. The services associated with the management of these assets range from planning to replacement. So planning, design, or specification, the construction or procurement, and then operation and maintenance. All of those services are provided for each of those assets. Public Works is asset-centric, and so it makes sense to organize our organization based on the assets that each group is responsible for. And so here we have those icons divided by division and for the Public Works Department. On the right-hand side is our largest division. That's the Public Works Operations Division. It's the consolidation of what used to be the street, utility, and support services. 28 and a half full-time equivalent employees belong to that division, and it's headed up by Assistant Public Works Director Favor with 2 superintendents. The other division to the left is the Airport Division, headed up by Tom Cleveland, and then the Engineering and Transportation Division, where our city engineer has been vacant for a little over a year. And then the administration group, myself and Patrick DeDiana is the management analyst. What I'd like to do now is go through each one of these individual divisions, kind of showing a little bit more detail of the organizational chart and some of the services associated with those divisions. This is the Engineering Transportation Division. As I mentioned, we've had several challenges in filling that in-house city engineer position. And so we've been using WBK and Greg Chismark to provide the city engineering function, if you will. I have been taking on the supervisory and administrative function of that position. To the left of the org chart is the transportation group. To the right is the transit group. And as you know, we're moving towards this consolidation of the Husky and City Bus line. That's being headed up by Bob Bourne, the temporary transit consolidation coordinator. And we're in the process of filling this transit grant administrator position. You're going to see a lot of activity in that transit as we move forward. They're providing effective and efficient bus service for our community. Lastly, there's been ongoing discussions at the policy committee meetings about DSATs and separating the transportation planning from the transit planning and taking that transportation planning and giving it to the county, because they have the planning engineers already in place and they do a lot of county-wide regional planning now. So it makes sense for them to do the planning, the transportation planning function of DSATs. With regard to the airport, we're doing, the service levels there are involved in planning, design and construction, and operation and maintenance. Airport manager Tom Cleveland has 7 line service personnel that report to him and man the fixed base operation or the airport operation 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then we have a public works part-time and a seasonal person who works under Tom to provide some of the mowing and snow removal operation, as well as keeping the equipment running, the specialized equipment for the airport, including the de-icer and the broom that sweeps off the runway. So there's a lot there going on with just a skeleton staff, if you will. The Airport Advisory Board has been reviewing a strategic plan, has been and participating in the development of a strategic plan. That was one of the goals that City Council gave us a few months ago, and I'm happy to report that it will be brought forward to City Council on the June 25th meeting for your consideration. The next slide gets into that public operations group, and it shows the management organization along with the distribution of the personnel by position and group. So our positions include skilled maintenance, crew leader, public works maintenance, and then part-time and seasonal personnel. And then the 7 groups across from street, grounds, over to drinking water. And you see the primary or the most populated groups are the street grounds, signs and signals, and drinking water, for a total of 28.5 full-time equivalent. And I would say that over the last 10 years, that number has dropped from 33 to that 28.5. So this group is, for the scope of services that it provides, including mowing over 380 acres, trimming 8,000 trees, servicing 170 vehicles and pieces of equipment, and the list goes on. That group is really challenged on a month-to-month basis to get all of the work done. This is a little bit more detail of the service levels provided by that street group, and it shows across the top the total percentage of labor as a percentage for the different service levels provided. Snow removal and grounds maintenance are at the top in terms of total hours spent. Those are functions that are seasonal, right? And when they happen, they require a lot of effort. Snowstorms, and that's why the overtime is so high for that particular. I would also say this is an average over the last 5 years. But mowing, grounds maintenance is very similar. This spring, for example, the wet, hot spring, and we've gotten behind on some of our mowing because of that peak. And basically, we take every resource we can to do those seasonal jobs. What that does then is that creates a backlog in some of our other jobs, and then we move to that. And then another peak in our demand will come, and we'll have to come off, and that's the way that Public Works operates. One of the challenges that we see going forward that I want to make sure Council recognizes is that because we have not been spending money on repairing our streets, we can expect, and we are seeing, an increased number of potholes. Potholing, filling potholes is very labor intensive. It takes 2 men on a truck. It takes a guard truck, a truck to protect the crew from someone running into them. We are not doing an adequate job in some of our other service levels, like stormwater, like forestry. And we're spending resources on duplicative services like loose leaf collection, where residents already pay for their leaves to be picked up after they bag them. We are also coming by and sweeping them off the street. So we're in a position now with reduced staffing and always doing the thing that's at hand, that we're creating a real problem. And that first problem that's going to become evident to our residents is the potholes. So we are going to be bringing forward a proposal for our next budget to eliminate loose leaf collection and to invest in more potholing equipment so that we can fill potholes in the 10 years that it's going to take to catch up with our street maintenance, even if we were to do a significant pass a significant funding levels tomorrow. So this is the dilemma that we're in right now in Public Works. With regard to the water funds, they have 9.5 full-time equivalents that are running this water system, producing 3.25 million gallons of water per day. They are operating 9 wells throughout the city and 5 water treatment plants. We have 4 elevated towers and over 180 miles of water mains with valves and all the appurtenances associated with that distribution system. Now, I'll tell you that when I was the water superintendent at the city of Rockford, we did some visitations of different facilities when we were looking to get radium treatment, and the city of DeKalb was one of the places we came. And we all commented on how neatly kept the facilities were. They're really clean and well kept. If you ever have an opportunity to go visit one, I would encourage you to. But kudos to Brian Favor and his staff. They do an excellent job. And I'll tell you, with 9.5 full-time equivalents, and 2 of those doing Julie locates most of the year, that is an extraordinary job. The city of DeKalb should be extraordinarily proud of these Public Works employees that provide this service. With regard to Public Works Administration, myself and Patrick DeDeanna, we do a number of things, including leading the capital planning effort. We're coordinating the annual budget for the Public Works Department. We're working on communications and special permits such as the MetroNet permitting that's coming up. We will be taking the lead in that. We're assisting the divisions in developing their memorandums and going through their requests for bids. We're doing project management in lieu of not having a city engineer. I am the de facto project manager for the Kishwaukee multi-use path, and Patrick is the project manager for the Fairview Annie Glidden project. We're looking at capital projects in the future. We have a couple of major bridges that we're going to be working on, First Street and Lucinda. And so those are big projects that are coming forward. A lot of activity here. Again, Patrick and I also provide division support for all the rest of the divisions, and I think we do a pretty good job just between us, looking at a large refuse contract and some of the electrical aggregation that's coming forward as well. So in conclusion, just talk about some of the goals that were given by City Council and how we're making strides there. Business friendly. I think we do a good job in our permit review process in conjunction with community development. I think that the group as a whole is very responsive to any requests that come from our residents and from City Council. Our airport strategic plan is ready to go, is ready to be released. Constantly looking at reducing operating costs. I think the consolidation of the 3 divisions into a single division will allow us to share resources and be able to have a larger pool to draw from in some of these peaks and valleys that we have as a normal course of operation. We're constantly evaluating our organizational structure with the city engineer and transit and the consolidation of the operating group. Capital planning, we are going to continue to bring forward a plan for our assets and replacement of the assets. Transit consolidation, that's going well. We will be looking for a transit manager to take the place of Bob Bourne, who was the temporary guy, and the full-time guy will come in, guy or gal. And then, of course, the comprehensive parking ordinance, which we kind of put on hold. We were near implementing that, and the Safe Streets Initiative kind of took precedent there. So, but with us entering now into phase 4, we're looking at getting that cranked back up. And so that's our presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that or anything about our budget.
Alderman Noriko.
Thank you. And I want to preface my questions by saying, for the most part, I'm looking for clarification or greater understanding, not necessarily to challenge a figure. Street signs, fabrication was noted. Is that work done in-house, or is that contracted out?
Yes, it's done in-house.
Okay.
There are some specialty signs. Most of what we do are the specialty signs. If they're more of the standard off-the-shelf signs, we will buy them. But most of the signs that we do in the sign shop are specialty signs. We do have, I think that budget is around 20,000. And with the Safe Streets Initiative, we're going to be stretching that, but we're doing what we can to meet that budget.
Snow and ice control materials. The 2017 budget was $120,500. The 2017 estimate was $500, and then for 2018, it's back up to $120,500. Do we have that light a snow year in 2017?
No, so I'm not sure why that would have been that way unless it wasn't updated.
Okay.
Alderman Noriko, can you tell us what page you're on so we could all turn to that and follow along?
Okay, let me see if I can find it.
Page 16.
Ooh, thank you.
The budget line item detail report?
Yeah.
Do you know what account number it is? Do you know the account number?
8235. It
My
ends in
assistant is
8235.
very helpful.
Yeah.
It says 120,500, and then 2017 estimate's only 500, and then it,
Yeah, the estimate wasn't updated,
Okay.
yeah. I know that we did get favorable prices in 2017, and we did come under
117.
budget for the
117.
year 2017, about $20,000 under because of the favorable pricing and because there was lighter than normal snow.
Okay. Oil, gas, and antifreeze. 2017 budget was 171.7. The estimate was 112.3, and 2018 was about 167. Did we use that much less than we anticipated in 2017? Or did prices drop, or?
You know, Molly, the 2017 numbers that are shown there are only 7 months, aren't they?
Oh, it's on the one that's in the budget.
Oh, on that,
So it's your
okay.
full year estimate?
Okay. I was
Well-
on the wrong.
Yeah, and the numbers that you should be looking at are the 119 utilized in 2016 against the 112 in 2017.
Okay.
You see what I mean? Which wouldn't show that large of a
Okay.
decrease. Isn't that right? Do you see that? Am I looking at that right?
Yeah, I have it, but I just don't know which account you're talking about.
In other words, on that item, 2016, you used $119,000 worth.
That's
The budget figure, for whatever reason, went to 171, but the estimate of the actual usage was only 112.
Yeah.
So you're way under budget on the utilization of oil, gas, and
Yes,
antifreeze.
Understood, yes. I think that's probably, that may be a reflection.
And that would be a good number.
Yeah, that may be a reflection of the lower than expected oil and gas prices for 2017. I would say that it probably is. I know that over the last 3 or 4 years, as that's fluctuated, we tend to be conservative in that number
Okay.
to accommodate, an increase, but oil and gas prices has stayed low, and so I would expect that to be
It will come in
the
less,
reason.
okay.
And then, so we come back the next year recognizing that they are lower now, and they've kind of stayed low, so we go lower than what we were in 2017 for 2018.
In terms of the budget number, you're $5,000 less.
Right.
In terms of your budget number.
Right. Recognizing that gas could go up to $4, and,
Do you need some
oil and antifreeze and all that stuff is subject to that same volatility.
Am I barking up the right tree there, Alderman Noriko?
Yeah,
In terms of
I
the
am,
allocation?
yeah, I understand. Airport taxes, licenses, and fees. The 2017 budget was 9,900, the estimate was 4,000. For 2018, it's up to 32,000.
What classification did that come under? Contractual services or?
Hold on a second, sorry.
Just or the page.
What page number did you jump to?
The airport fund, so,
Oh, the airport fund.
Airport fund, and what's the number again?
well, it was taxes, licenses, and fees.
Oh, is that what
Tom, do you know what the number is? Is there an account number with
Yeah,
it?
hold on.
65 dash?
Hold on a sec, sorry.
There was a reassessment of the hangars, so the taxes went up on the,
Okay.
on
Is
that.
that, Tom, you want to address that?
Mayor and council, there was, like Molly said, there was a reassessment on the taxes for all our rental hangars, and it did go up.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be going down for the next 5 years, it's supposed to be going down every 5 years now, but it was pumped up pretty good.
For the capital projects fund, Annie Glidden Fairview message, 50,000. Was that just the required public communication on all the work that was going to be done?
No, that is the idea of working collaboratively and having a collaborative project with NIU to have a message board
Oh,
at
okay.
our entry, gateway entry in Annie Glidden Road.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments of Director Holdeman? Alderman Verbeek.
With regard to the city engineer position, has there been further consideration to tweak the posting, maybe not include a specific salary amount, but to say commensurate with experience or commensurate with comparable data? I think from a customer service delivery standpoint, it would be key to get that position refilled. Where does that stand?
As you recall, we brought forward 6 weeks ago or so a proposal to request qualifications. We received those qualifications. We interviewed firms, and we have a preferred firm that we're going to enter negotiations with. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to negotiate a comparable price for a comparable number of hours of a in-house engineer, and that will be provided by the engineering firm. One of the advantages of that, of course, is that we don't have the legacy cost associated with the retirement fund of that person. The engineering firm that we're talking to has a financial model that would take that person out of their overhead calculation, and so they can offer him at a very competitive rate. So we're anxious to sit down with them and negotiate a contract that we'll be bringing forward, we believe, on June 25th.
But you expect that then to offer a full-time presence at the city for
Yes.
those service needs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that person would be in the city of DeKalb, providing, located at our Public Works facility and providing city engineering services for a comparable salary plus benefits compensation.
Do you envision this as the best long-term solution, or do we still want to keep a city engineer in mind for the way we operate?
it's a little bit of a rock and a hard place because we're not going to get a favorable pricing without making some long-term commitment. And by long-term, I mean more than a year. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing month to month, and we do not get favorable pricing, and we will not get favorable pricing that way. And so what we do is we only get 5 hours a day of services. And we just can't operate that way. So having someone in the seat and here, being able to attend meetings on behalf of the city and understanding what our needs are over a period of time, at this point, it is the best option for us because the market is just so shallow. I see several communities in the same predicament, that the engineering market is just not there.
And Alderman Verber, just to add and reiterate what Tim presented when we brought the request for the going out and getting RFPs with the firms is, I think we posted the position 3 times. We changed the recruitment process as far as the outreach. We widened the pool. We, casted a wider net. And as Tim indicated, we are not the only community that's experiencing the difficulties in hiring professional engineers. So I would agree that for now, the best solution is to bring on someone full-time on a contractual basis, but absolutely continue to reevaluate if the market changes and the talent is out there. I think the ultimate goal would be to have a city employee as the engineer, but going on this month-to-month is not the cost-effective way to proceed. So let's give this a try, bring on someone for at least that year and reevaluate it year to year.
And also, I guess, with regard to the hiring, and we're looking at transit managers as well, do we have an early indication of the difficulty of what it could take to hire these personnel, or do we go to a firm that could take care of multiple disciplines if we have to? What is the best option? And back to the transit positions and the consolidation of services, when will we have an idea of what does that sustainable plan look like for the next 5-10 years or so?
Well, so the temporary transit consolidation coordinator is working with Husky Line and with VAC in developing the plan going forward. We're developing an RFP for that contractor that will run Husky. We're working on the IGA between NIU and the city, and we're recruiting. We're going to begin recruiting for that transit manager, which will ultimately take the role of the operations manager, moving that forward. I think we've got the framework based on the transit development plan and the work that the policy committee has done at DSAS. We've got a good framework and a vision for what the 3 to 5 years is going to look like, but we have to implement that. And we're really in the implementation stages. That's why Bob Bourne was such a great find, because he had actually been the transit manager at Ames, Iowa for 12 years and then had gone into consulting, helping others do the same thing for 10 years. And so he's going to help us, and then he's going to hand the ball off to a full-time transit manager. We're keeping our fingers crossed. Bob seems to think that we're going to be able to find someone for the salary range that we're looking at and the qualifications that we're looking at, because this is really a unique opportunity to begin the operation of a new consolidated bus system. So it would really be a star on someone's resume, and so we will likely get national candidates. And we'll be looking nationally for that person.
Mike, I don't know if Tim agrees with me or not, but I've been involved with this DSATS thing now for the past year, and if we could be as lucky in the engineering arena as we're going to be with Bob Bourne, and hopefully finding that full-time transit manager, if you could equate that to engineering. You know, I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but boy, that would be because, you know, this is the best-case scenario, but I don't know if it's, you know, we don't have to like it, but I guess we have to be satisfied, yeah.
And then have we determined where the funding comes from to fund the transit-related positions? So have we determined those impacts yet?
Yes, we have that in the transit and transportation budget. It contemplates the transit manager taking over from the temporary transit consolidation coordinator, and that money is in there and available from the federal and state grant programs. So
Thank you.
we have plenty there.
Right, so
We're-
Tim, just to clarify, those are not city funds. I mean, the
Right, those-
DSAT's
right, yeah.
personnel are paid through federal and state
Yeah.
grants, so that's
That-
not general fund dollars.
So that transit system, all of the operation and all of the city personnel are paid for through federal and state grants. And we're leaving a lot on the table. The consolidation of the system is going to help us get closer to maximizing our opportunity, but we're leaving a lot on the table right now.
So literally then, no financial impact on the city of DeKalb?
That's correct. That's
Perfect,
correct.
thank you.
Yeah.
Alderman Fagan.
Could you, when you talk about leaf collection, the last time we talked about it, and I know you're going to talk about it some other time in the future, it sounds like, but if we cut out leaf collection, I believe you said it doesn't save us any money, if we cut that out. So if we take out leaf collection and then put it toward potholes like you talked about 20 minutes ago, is it just because of the time that's involved?
Yeah. It's because we have limited resources and we're allocating our resources to loose leaf collection and taking away from forestry, stormwater, and pothole patching
Okay.
in order to do that. So we've only got a finite number of resources, amount of resources, personnel. And so when we take 4 crews of 3 guys, 12, out of our 16 available, and put them on loose leaf collection for 8 weeks between October and December, we pretty much say everything else but what these other 2 guys can do is
Right.
on hold.
Right.
And that means stormwater, forestry, and several other things.
Right.
And, you know, if that were the only way that our residents could dispose of their leaves, I would understand that. But we also pay in our waste contract for our haulers to take the bagged leaves for free.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions of Public Works Director Holdeman? Alderman Markwart.
As far as the water system capital changing, is 2019 another year? Because it seemed to me that I was remembering we were like skipping a year between major projects. Or is there a major water main replacement each year?
Yes, there will be water main replacement each year. We did flip-flop 2 this year. We were to do Joanne Lane this year, about $1 million project. And Oak Drive next year. We flip-flopped those because of the water tower painting, which is about a $600,000 project. So we're trying to kind of hit that $1 million mark on water, or not really water main replacements, but capital improvements. That would include water tower painting. And so with the $600,000 water main, or tower painting this year, about a $400,000 water main replacement on Oak Drive equals about $1 million. So we're planning on next year tackling Joanne Lane, about $1 million project there.
Okay. So it is $1 million each year. It's just fluctuating between
Correct, yeah.
the mains and the thing. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? I've got a generic question, Tim, and if you'd like to give me a generic answer, that's fine. I asked Molly in a meeting I had with her this morning, what's the status of our financial situation in the city of DeKalb mid-year 2018? Given the fact that this council worked on a budget and made several cuts, some which were not cuts that we wanted to make necessarily, but ones that we had to make. From your scope and from your sense, where are we in terms of the public works arena midway through 2018?
We're struggling.
Okay.
Yeah, with Andy Rye going to fill the superintendent's position and not backfilling that position. Andy did, as you know, he does an excellent job as the superintendent, acting superintendent. He also did an excellent job in the field. And losing that person out of a 16, 17-person crew was a significant detriment to, and so being able to stay up with things, you know, the spring with all the rain and the grass growing, it was very difficult for us to keep up. And you know, we've had some of our residents complain and call, you know, both you and myself, Mayor, you know, that we have had complaints about why the city properties are not getting mowed. And the fact is, you know, we're just short-staffed with such a peak in demand for that one particular service.
That was more than a generic answer. You know, I appreciate that. You know, all we can do is do the best we can. We will continue to do what we have been elected to do, and that is, along with staff, serve the citizens of DeKalb to the best of our abilities. So we all have to suck it up occasionally. As you say, we're struggling. All I would ask is that you keep our city manager, in this case our interim city manager, and this council advised of how that struggle continues.
Absolutely.
And we do have your backs. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, moving to, thank you, Tim, and Brian, and Tom. Thank you. Our service level review now for our finance department, and our finance director / soon-to-be interim city manager Molly Talkington will speak to this item.
Well, thank you. So I thought I'd stick to our 10 minutes for you. So the finance department, our primary responsibilities, we account for all your municipal resources. We maintain a fiscally sound government. We work to adhere to all your legal requirements and the financial management principles, like your financial policies that you have in place, and we apply those resources effectively to meet the city's needs. And as you can tell, one of the things we receive annually is our Distinguished Budget Award. With that, let's go over the core functions. So the annual budget, we're in the middle of doing a full year budget review this year, so you guys are getting a lot more information on the annual budget and how that works than most of our services here at the city. But basically, we try to support the strategic plan and the 10 goals that council have outlined through how we put together the budget, and it communicates those services. So this year we undertook the Budget Basics video to push out to the public and try to explain it in a non-financial technical jargon way. Along with that, though, we also have our annual audit, which produces our comprehensive annual financial report. We call the CAFR. We do receive an award each year for that, which basically tells you we are following those accounting principles that are in place, and we're doing the financial work to meet those legal and standards that are set in place. We also have other reports. These are kind of the two largest ones you guys hear and see a lot, but we have a treasurer's report and we have a popular annual financials report. There's a lot of required reports we do, these two being the largest. We also provide support for utility services. So when you enter the building, it's finance that you see at the front desk with our customer service reps. And there we have our billing, water billing, that we take payments, we send out the payments, and that's also included is the refuse and recycling along on those bills. And then we include the sewer charges, that's through the Kishwaukee. We do have multiple payment options, so we try to stay citizen-friendly. I know we talk a lot about business-friendly, but here we're trying to be friendly to the residents, and there's 5 different ways you can come and pay your bills: in person, Dropbox, online, and automatic electronic transfer. So there's multiple ways that we try to make it available for citizens. We also have the business license and permit function within finance, where we coordinate most of the work with these. We do work with a lot of different departments to make sure we have all the needed information, like community development, to make sure what they're requesting is structurally sound and whatever the requirement is, with the legal, to make sure that the state of Illinois has signed off. If they're going to do video gaming, you have to get permits through the state that then we also have to look at here at the city. There are 19 licenses and permits. They're available online, so you can click to get the applications. And then finance really coordinates and facilitates the proper review of those. And then we take on special projects. So this year we're undergoing a financial software implementation. So we're switching from a system that's really outdated and doesn't work to produce the reports that a city council and as our citizens want to see. So we're hoping to improve kind of the core of how the city takes in data and reports data through the financial software system, and improve the outward facing information you get. So there's a lot that goes on in finance that you don't see with the journal entries and the technical accounting work that we do. But when it comes out in a report, we'd like to have it in a way where we can give you the information in a way that makes sense to you. Instead of giving you, so far, I think we've given you like 6 different ways to look at this information. So that's a project we're undergoing in our department now, and we're really taking an emphasis of looking at internal controls during this year as well. It kind of partners with switching to the new financial software, but trying to make sure that if we have a procedure written, we're following that procedure. You can have it written on a piece of paper that this department will do A, B, and C, and D, but maybe in reality they're doing A and D, so we need to test that to make sure we're following all the steps. If the steps are no longer necessary, some of them are maybe written for the old financial software or the old way of how we would do that process, we need to bring them up to the new way, but to really identify those gaps and make improvements to those gaps. And part of how we're doing that is through just how we're structured in finance. We have gone down 1.5 positions in the last 2 years. So we lost a senior accountant level position, and we did lose the customer service representative. We used to have another part-time position there. So right now, it's really myself as the director, goes to our assistant finance director, who's Bob Miller. I know you guys do see him somewhat. And then down to the rest of the staff. So we have an accountant, Susan. She has been tasked to be cross-trained with the payroll and compensation analyst. So those 2 positions are working together, part of that internal controls function. We can have the accountant go out on vacation for a week and have someone be able to backfill and test their work. So those 2 positions are cross-training, really trying to learn what the other one does. So in our payroll and compensation analyst position is Stephanie Carlson for now, and then we have 3 technicians, and they have kind of specialized focus. So Pat focuses on your water billing and making sure everything with water is correct. Rachel is more focused on our accounts receivable, so billing people and making sure we get that money back. So when we're billing for airport hangars, Rachel's the contact for that, any leases, that type of work. And then Carrie Parker, who is also filling in as a deputy city clerk tonight, her main focus is on accounts payable. So when you have a bill to pay, goes through her, and making sure we're following those purchasing processes that we have in place, that manual that, if it's over 20,000, it has to come to council first. Making sure we're in line with those. And she does a little bit more with the risk management side of finance as well. So in those 2 positions, Rachel and Carrie are cross-training with each other, so we have the backups and, that second person to check when you need. And then Pat has been really working with the 2 customer service representatives that we have one right now. Amy is at the front desk, and we are in the middle of interviews to fill that second part-time position. But those 2 positions are working with Pat to be able to answer more general water questions as people come to the front. So Pat doesn't always have to go up to answer those questions. We're trying to, again, build that cross-training and more internal controls there as well. And with that, I leave it for questions.
Questions of Molly regarding the finance department? Alderman Noriko.
On page 119, account 400-8473, claims, liability, and property insurance. In 2017, it was 0, and in 2018, it's 100,000.
You said I'm sorry, which page did you say?
119.
Let me get to it really quickly.
We changed accounts, Alderman Rico.
Okay.
We changed the accounts to make it more, put the funds in a more appropriate account that's, descriptive of what those funds are used for.
Okay.
So it's not that we didn't need the money, it's just it was transferred to finance in that specific fund.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Fagan.
Page 89, we've got a 75,000 for,
The contractual services?
Yeah.
So during 17, you had an interim finance director for part of the year.
my question was, is that what that was?
It's partly that, and a portion of it was we used Ellers to do a 5-year financial plan.
Okay,
And so there's kind of the 2 one-time fundings in that
Okay.
year.
thank you.
Any other questions? I'd ask you the same question, not overall finance, but within your own department. How are we mid-year?
Oh, well, I think we're doing okay. We've had some vacancies, and so we're working to get through those. But I think once we're staffed and we get the new software in place, the staffing level you see in finance should be right where we need it to be, because we'll gain some improvements with the new financial software. We're slower in some of our customer service responses right now, because we do have a very slow software. As you saw, remember, you push the button, it was a minute before the address even came up. But that is some of the things we want to improve with the new software, which will help us get back to being more responsive and getting through people at the counter and on the phones a lot quicker when we have the new software to help with that. So for right now, we're in the midst of going through the transition, and I think we'll come out in a good place.
We may have discussed this in the discussion of your being appointed interim city manager once Patty officially resigns, and we received that letter this week, and I guess we will make that public maybe Monday during the council meeting. Council knows about it. Will we need to plug in a person within your department and the finance department to take over some of the, I don't want to call them loose ends, but reshifting, so that when you do move to the city manager's post, the interim in an interim basis, that those responsibilities are not going to fall through the cracks in finance?
Correct. So Bob will step up and be kind of the acting finance director during this time. So he will, of course, I'm kind of taking budget with me in the interim city manager role. That doesn't go away.
Right.
But there are duties that Bob will need to do that I would do on a normal basis in that director role that he will take on. And instead of filling, bringing in like the interim finance director with Jeff, we're looking at a senior accountant level position that could almost step in at any position that we have to, really I want them tasked with some of the internal controls work, because that, I think, helps with a fresh eye. Someone new from the outside can ask those questions and help us with that, but also to be there and have a skill level, so if our accountant is working on implementation, someone can be there to help do journal entries during the day. Or if Bob's working on implementation, they can do, those reviews and still have that somewhat higher level. So it's kind of that midpoint to backfill and finance, so we're not going to miss a beat, that we can keep going and services will stay on track.
I know it would be it may be safe to assume that this city council is very comfortable knowing that finance department's going to be fine as you move into the interim. But I wanted the public to know that. I wanted to know that we do have a comfort level that we're going to be able to move forward, and, part and parcel of that comfort level is your assurance that you feel strong enough that we're gonna get the job done in finance.
Yes,
while
I
you're-
do believe that.
I beg your pardon?
I do believe that.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Molly.
Well, you're welcome.
Okay, now we move along to line item review, Police Department, and our Chief, Gene Lowry.
Good evening, council, community. I just wanted to, for the first part, maybe address the annual report and try and get through that as quickly as possible, if that's okay. I left hard copies for you at your positions on the dais. That report is also obviously available online as part of the agenda memo, but it's also up online on our webpage as well as of today. So to try and make this as efficient as possible, let's hit it right away. This is our DeKalb Police Annual Report for 2017. A snapshot review of 2017 is going to include a view of community-based and proactive policing strategies, a straightforward review of service demands, and policing strategies in crime. So let's first take a look at community-based and proactive policing strategies in 2017. Some of the standouts that were really underway and being implemented to a certain degree, and some still in the developmental stages, include Compass. You've heard that several times now, changing outcomes by making parents accountable, supported, and successful. That we hope to have fully implemented in 2018. Project Hope, heroin opioid outreach, prevention, and education. That's still in the developmental stage, but we've had a couple of beta tests with that where we've had 3 individuals that we've encountered on the street where we had the process set up in conjunction with our partners, and where we actually made transports or arranged transports to heroin treatment facilities or opioid treatment facilities for situations that may have otherwise ended in arrest. So we took people out of the potential for immediately going into the criminal justice system and got them into rehab. So our beta tests have gone very well with that. The Camp Power program, you know all about that. 2017 was a highlight because we won an international award to the International City County Managers Association down in San Antonio, Texas for the program in the Health and Safety Award component of that. One thing that's coming in 2018 that was really developed off a program that we've had implemented for a couple of years but was active in 2017 is the Adopt a School program. That's where we have police officers actually go into the schools, not as an SRO, but as police officers on duty when they have the time available, interact with the kids, the staff, the parents, and have a presence, especially before school and right after school, to let people know that the police are engaged in their schools in a positive way. We've had officers read to kids at school, participate in lunch with the kids, just sit down and talk to them, participate in other school activities. What that potentially could evolve to for 2018 is we're working with the Juvenile Justice Committee of DeKalb County, which I'm a member of. And that committee has in the works a grant that may fund a Cops and Kids program that'll be modeled after the one that came out of California several years ago. And that's another very similar to Adopt a School program. Proactive strategies implemented pretty vibrantly during the course of this year. This past year in 2017, we really began to amp up our intelligence-driven policing, and that's basically putting the data we have on crime to good use and getting the police officers out there when we can, when we anticipate our greatest activity levels are at the locations that we anticipate it happening at, in an effort to proactively address crime head-on. A big coup for us last year is a crime analyst position. That's a full-time position funded in total for this city by the Illinois National Guard. So we have a full-time crime analyst that has never been part of the police department at any point in time in its history, that because of a grant that our detective commander wrote, we are funded indefinitely, as long as we can justify its use and the program continues, through the Illinois National Guard. That position provides information to the police by collating data from a variety of sources, including our own records, to tell us who we should be looking at, especially for narcotics trafficking and other items such as terrorism. That was maybe the best grant I've ever seen written as far as outcomes go. Tremendous asset to us. Problem-oriented policing, the POP and COP operations. The COP is for community-oriented policing operations. And you'll see when I hit the highlights of the data just real lightly, that a big part of our increase in calls for service last year were the result of us taking two police officer details going out that didn't have to respond to calls for service and proactively address crime. And I'll touch base on that in a little bit. It increased our calls for service, it increased our arrests, and I think it had a very positive effect overall and will have a long-term positive effect. Last year, we began the lethality assessment program in concert with Safe Passage. What that does is, with the ever-rising level of domestic violence, not just in this community, but in every community across the country, the lethality assessment program teaches our officers responding to those calls how to use a checklist and gives them certain skills through training to see if there are certain factors present in some of these domestic violence situations that we should be particularly cognizant of that may result in serious injury or death to a victim. That's a Maryland-based program. Safe Passage is the domestic violence shelter and advocacy group for relationship violence. They have spearheaded that grant initiative, and we are part of that, and we will be implementing lethality assessment full-blown this year. Safe Parks program, part of that was grant-based. As you know, the police utility vehicle we have was in part funded by the Park District. And that allows us to more proactively patrol the park walkways and paths and get into areas that we traditionally can't get into by squad car, makes our presence known more in the parks, and serves in other proactive components within the parks. Safe Streets Initiative, I'm sure you've heard enough about that up to this point. You're going to hear more in a couple of city council meetings. Just to let you know, phase one, and there's a lot of ground to cover with this, but in phase one, I can anecdotally say that we're already noticing a change in the level of calls and type of calls, and that, you may recall, is the area of Russell and Crane Drive and Welsh Park. I can tell you the citizen complaints in regard to Welsh Park have almost dropped to zero. So that's already showing some positives. Hopefully that translates through the others, but that's really been a key one starting out with. Again, at the next council meeting, you'll hear some more about this, but the Department of Justice Mental Health Grant, we're going into phase 2 of that. We got a $75,000 grant last year, a planning grant that could be put us in line to get up to $750,000 over the next 3 years to develop a way to have an appropriate level of service to meet the needs of our behavioral health issues that the police officers encounter. Huge coup for us. The second phase of that grant's already been completed and is awaiting assessment by the Department of Justice. Keep your fingers crossed. Oops, I think I went one too far. I'm sorry. Let's talk about crime in 2017. Part 1 crimes, the most serious offenses decreased by 10%. That was great news. Part 1 crimes have decreased in 4 out of the last 5 years in the city. It doesn't mean we don't have challenges. It doesn't mean we don't have more work to do, but that's good news. The area that concerned everybody, especially last fall, was the gun violence. Gun violence and crimes committed using weapons increased by 13%. No matter how big a decrease you have in any kind of area, if you have an uptick in gun violence, that's going to be the lightning rod for community concern and interest, and justly so. Our proactive policing measures are attempting to deal with that on a daily basis. In regard to, I'll catch that in just a second, I'm sorry. There were also 141 fewer accidents last year as compared to 2016, which resulted in a 10% decrease in motor vehicle accidents. Hopefully. I guess I really have this messed up. I should have had a different slide up for you previously, so I apologize for that. Let me give you the straightforward review, which is the correct slide, in regard to service demands in 2017. There were over 4,000 items of evidence processed through the police department. We handled over 5,000, actually 5,893 requests for FOIAs, subpoenas, reports, recordings, evidence, and other documents. Communications, our radio room handled over 115,000 calls. Those are 10-digit phone number hardline calls into the communication center. Those included 22,107 911 calls, 52,136 police calls, a 14% increase over last year, and 5,664 fire or EMS calls by our records. So let me hit kind of the gravy point, or maybe not the gravy point's the right way to say it, but where the rubber meets the road on calls for service in regard to the increase from 16 to 17. So if you look at an increase of 6,442 calls as part of the total increase in calls for service in 2017, they were our self-initiated calls. So there's two types of calls. One is a call from a resident or a community member or visitor, whoever, saying, help, I need the police for whatever that is, emergency, non-emergency, whatever it is. The second type that is calculated by our computer-aided dispatching system is calls for service that are generated by the police. That means a police officer sees someone committing a crime, sees someone committing a traffic offense, and they initiate a call based on that. So sometimes that might be confusing to folks, and I wanted to make that explicitly clear. Two types of calls for service, one generated by the public, one generated by the police. Calls for service generated by the police in our department does not include, hey, I've got to pick up the mail at City Hall. Hey, we've got to do this errand or that errand. It's specific calls that are entered in to either generate a police report or other form of contact. In 2017, there were 6,442 of those calls in regard to the self-initiated calls category, the police officer calls. So what that meant was, trying to correlate it to an actual tangible item you can look at, is when we put the problem-oriented policing detail out of 2 police officers in areas where we had more crime, and we took the responsibility of taking calls off of their backs, they generated that 35% increase in self-initiated calls for service. Does that make sense? Those proactive police officers, because of what they were doing, eyes and ears on the street, added those calls for service to the mix by being available to do that instead of responding to calls for service. Key point. That started during the thick of our dealing with the gun violence last year. It has worked so well, combining intelligence-driven policing with that proactive policing or cops details that we put out, that we're continuing it. We have continued it on an overtime basis because of staff shortages, but we have continued it. In 2017, we had 4 police officer vacancies and as many as 6 police officers out of service due to injuries or other reasons. That equated to 10% of our patrol division. So when you take up to 10 people out of the mix, and at times, we had 4 vacancies and 6 people out. That in a department that has a total of 65 sworn from top to bottom, it's a big hit. It's a big hit. So the men and women adapted very well. In closing, I would offer the time up for any questions you might have about the annual report. I would also say that There are numerous variables that factor into overtime that if you have any questions about, I can address. But a lot of times they're synergistic. So when you're low on staffing, you have to fill minimum shift vacancies on overtime. If you send people to training and you're low on staffing, you got to backfill those slots with overtime. The shift minimums vary by shift, and they're dealt with based on the data, not some, hey, this is how we've always done it. We have reviewed shift calls for service and demands by day of week and hour of day. And we staff our shift minimums based on the demands for service. We have some built-in flexibility in the event we start to see things evolving where we either hold over or call people in to address other situations. I'll leave the floor to you if you have any questions about the annual report.
So the self-initiated calls, Gene, is that a result of what you would call more proactivity in terms of internal intelligence?
In part,
Does
yes.
that make sense?
Yes, and I think the other component is having police officers available who can address things without having the burden of answering calls for service on their shoulders. So, most of the time, traditionally in police work, you have X amount of police officers on the street, and all they do is respond to calls, and when they have time, go proactively address specific crime problems. It may be a simple neighborhood complaint where somebody's saying, hey, there's a intersection that we have some safety concerns about or traffic concerns about, or in our situation, it could be dealing with the impact of gun violence.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alderman Orico.
Chief Lowry, your staff, the officers have great attitudes, but I'm wondering, have you seen any kind of pushback or issues because of the amount of overtime required, especially during those kind of crisis periods when you had both vacancies and, people out for one reason?
I think from what I've seen of the information at hand in regard to our officer-involved injuries or on-duty related injuries, this was a bad year for us for duty-related injuries. I think that, in part, is as a result of, working people on excessive overtime. The officers have done very well, but there's clearly, they clearly hit stages at different times, depending on their regular work schedule and overtime, where they hit burnout. And, it is a risk. There is no question about it. It is a risk. So we do see it. We do our best to compensate for it. But it's like everyone else. Times are tough. We got to move through this time to try to get ahead of the curve a little bit and address the needs of the community.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Verbeek.
Chief Lowry, with regard to your Compass Initiative and other work, I think that's what I'm most interested in, is what can we do as a council to help with policy to get at the root causes of things like gun violence. And please continue to keep letting us know what we can do from a policy perspective, but from a root cause standpoint, it's not uncommon to see people drive or travel some distance to come here and cause crime, passing by many other places along the way, probably fighting ruthless traffic. But from a policy perspective, what can we do to help identify those reasons?
I think it comes in a couple ways in a very general sense. Safe Streets Initiative really hits on target for what you're saying. So when I have people say, well, why parking or why this in regard to safe streets, it really boils down to the motor vehicle is estimated to be used or be a factor in about 70% of all crimes that are committed. We all know that many of our most serious offenses that occur in this community have addresses associated with the offenders that are not from this community. So a small component of dealing with that is addressing parking in high-crime areas. It doesn't mean parking shouldn't be addressed citywide in other areas, but specifically in high-crime areas. So when you support measures like that, that's one way the council really does a bang-up job. You've supported us through grant initiatives. This is the first police department I've worked at where we have taken such a comprehensive look at. We have a mental health challenge with behavioral health issues on the street. I was looking at the data today. It sits somewhere around 380-some calls for service, and it's in your annual report when you look at mental subject calls, suicides, and suicidal subject calls. It's in the 380s, where we have responded to calls for services in 2017 with people with behavioral health issues at that kind of crisis level. And to address that, we know we have limited resources here, so we went out after that mental health grant. We know we have some parental accountability issues, so the deputy chief has been leading the charge on Compass. We know that we had some issues with juvenile delinquency in the summer, so we went after Camp Power. We're constantly trying to not be, welded to a program. If a program loses its efficacy, go somewhere else. Try something else. But these measures, I think we're doing a really good job with. Here's the tough one for you guys. We can only carry this so far. There's X amount of police officers, there's X amount of proactive policing strategies you can implement, and there's X amount of resources available. The hard part to cover, and everybody in this room, community alike, is working towards making it better. But if you have limited economic opportunity that creates jobs, if you have rental property surplus, and you have poverty, those are things the police can't control. So those are often symptoms in regard to communities that have higher crime issues. Those have to change. We can make our headway a little bit, we can keep moving forward, and we're going to, but those bigger picture economic issues and quality of life issues, those are the tough ones. And you're doing that. We see it here with everything you try to do. But that's probably the biggest challenge.
Thank you.
Any further comments of Chief Lowry? The average guy on the street, our average citizen, in my opinion, is not going to read that report. They may not even see it. They may see an executive summary of it in the newspaper. They may take the initiative and go to the website and see it. But I'll tell you, in my estimation, and I've talked to a number of people over the last year, and I think this council might agree because I've talked to a few of my fellow aldermen on this also. When we have a roundup like we did with those 14 gangbangers, and they were on the front page of the Daily Chronicle, that's big stuff. And that's what the average citizen is saying now. That's what we need to do more of. We need to maintain that. And I'm not trying to poo-pooing your idea, Gene, that we need to address some of the core issues of why people are getting into those kind of situations. And I would hope that this city council is up to address some of those issues. But I'll tell you, you talk to the guy in the restaurant or the gal after church, and they're impressed because of what they've seen in terms of that progress, getting rid of some of that criminal element.
It does make a big difference, and you may recall last year, over a 30-day period, we made several hundred warrant arrests, served several search warrants, and we made a big deal out of it. We're going to do that again, and I would say that openly to the community, so there's no surprise in this, and to the council as well. Prior to students returning to this campus, we're going to go very proactive with a multitude of resources coming to help us to come in and try and do another 30-day proactive, very aggressive law enforcement measure to send the message that this wasn't a one-and-done thing.
Well, good for us. Any other questions? Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it. Okay, continuing under the line item review section of our committee of the whole meeting tonight, we have the IT department. Excuse me.
You got to catch me up on that one too, Mayor. I've got to do my line item review with you too.
You're gonna do your line item now, and, okay, very good. I thought that may have been down further on sorry. You're still in waiting, Mark, back there, so.
So line item review, last year in 2017, we finished under budget. A big part of that is, we're pretty cognizant of resource management. Well over 95% of our budget is tied up in personnel costs. So there's not a lot of fudge factor in where we go with anything else. So at the end of this, so far, at the end of April 30th, the budget report out of finance showed us we should have been right about the 33% mark. At that time, we were sitting at the 24% mark, so we were doing pretty good. Currently, as compared to 2017 with the numerous vacancies, we now have 3 additional police officers with 1 vacancy left to fill. Those just got filled over the last few weeks, so we'll have about a 16-week delay before those 3 officers can get out on the street. Fortunately, they were all certified officers from other departments. So that will help us come fall, so we're still kind of short. We just recently received 2 retirement notifications, so we'll be losing 2 more officers this fall. So we'll kind of be back at it again, but we're working on some ideas to make some things happen to try and fill those slots. So I would say any questions you have about specific line items, I did send out an email, indicated that if you had anything, let me know, but I'd be happy to address any questions you have about the budget.
Gee, big surprise.
Who has that hand up? Alderman Norrico.
You're going to cut it off someday.
No.
Chief, under training and professional development, in 2017, it was at 73, and in 2018, it went up to about 98.9. I realize that police officers have a lot of mandated training requirements. Was there something new that came along, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Last year, because we had 3 vacancies in detectives, that being 1, vacancies in supervisors due to retirements, all of that training that's mandated, for example, like to investigate a homicide in this state, you have to have the lead homicide certification. So that's a very expensive school that we have to send each detective to that has not gotten that. So in accordance, in working with finance, we gave them the heads up early on in the budget process that knowing the vacancies we had, not only in individual personnel slots, but in actual positions, the big ones were detectives and supervisors, that we were going to have an increase in our budget for that.
Okay.
Part of the methodology to address that as well, in 2017, no commanders went to conferences, myself included, unless they were grant funded. I went to 1 conference that I paid for out of my pocket, but unless they were grant funded or otherwise, I shut it down for the command staff so we could get some of the other needs met internally.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Verbeek.
I understand there would be a financial impact, but could we consider filling positions in advance of retirements? In other words, because of the length of time you refer to, I would be interested in considering that investment.
Thank you for asking. I feel like I paid you to do that. I currently, if we have the opportunity next week, we have 3 more interviews to do. We could potentially fill our 4th vacancy, which would be great if we can. I've got my fingers crossed. But looking at what we have already for fall, with 2 coming up vacant in August, I want to come to the council with a plan based on savings in the budget to date, consideration for the overtime we spend. In 2017, we spent over 10,000 hours of overtime backfilling for minimums. When you compare that to where we were with training, we spent like 480 hours of overtime on training and over 10,000 just filling slots for people to work the street. So I want to come with a plan. I know budget's tight, and I want to show you where we stand realistically, especially the closer we get. But we have 3 slots scheduled for the academy in October. I would really like to come to the council and say, listen, we have some slots available. There's some contractual issues with these 2 retirement employees that we have to get past a couple months with, but to see if there's any way to front load, at least get these people hired and in training, based on savings we had or could have through overtime.
Great.
Jerry?
Alderman Fanouken.
And see, that's one of the discussions we had earlier. I would love to see us be able to, once we get those notifications of retirements, for us begin that process of hiring the next day, because it obviously saves us a lot of time and a lot of overtime spending. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, Gene, and it's the HR folks that we need to work with and get that done. Because I don't see any reason why we couldn't begin the process the next day after those notifications.
I agree, and HR's really done a bang-up job, especially with these recent hires. One of the problems, to be very, very honest and open about this, is in the collective bargaining agreement, there are some benefits to people who can use some of their benefit time once they announce their retirement. It's a great benefit to the individual, and I hate to be negative, but organizationally, it really impacts the mission. So that's what I want to bring to the table when we come with a request closer to fall, about if it's possible, if it's in our wheelhouse to do it. Because we can have someone be off duty, no longer on active duty in August, but they're on the books until January 1st because of the collective bargaining agreement.
Well, and I understand that, but my point is that if we get a notification or a retirement date, that we should begin the process to fill that right away, rather than waiting till closer to the retirement date, and then avoid some of that lapse time.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
Because, obviously, with police having been in my family, I understand what you're fighting, so.
I totally agree. Thank
And
you.
Alderman Fanouken, that does happen. I mean, I can guarantee you that HR doesn't just sit on the letter and wait for the, last possible moment.
Well, I'm sure they don't wait that long, but, I'm talking about, we should have a process
And
in
that's,
place that.
and that's
that
why the
triggers
lists
it
are there.
automatically.
Yeah, the police eligibility lists. And absolutely, the discussions begin as we receive notifications as quickly as possible on who's next on the eligibility list.
Mm-hmm.
But the timing has to be appropriate, because we don't want to extend an offer to someone who now, because they retired in August, but they're on the books till January, we currently don't have the flexibility to bring someone on board until that person's off the books to bring in the new person on the
Well,
books.
and I understand that from council's point of view, that is a financial question that we'd have to address. And I understand that entirely. But I think that several of us up here are pro-police to the point where we need to work around just the dollar part of that and work to the crime side of that, so that we're not risking other officers getting injured because of the excess time they're spending on the beat.
Absolutely, and some municipalities do have a policy in place that upon notification of retirement, not only will recruitment begin, but hiring and placing that person, no matter what time frame that falls in, even if that officer is still on the books who has announced a retirement.
And I think that's, as we get into the budget for the police for the coming year, it's something that we should at least discuss, being able to have some flexibility.
Yes.
Alderman Verbeek.
Along with our other core services, announced retirements, fire, public works, consideration of filling that earlier, so we don't have that lag.
Well, and I agree, but I think the police department probably should have the higher priority in that, just because of the impact it has across the community.
If I may add, budget-wise, the city of DeKalb used to have in their budget funding for retirements, and that was reduced to, there is no funding available for retirements to have that overlap as part of one of your budget reductions in a prior year. So it wasn't for the FY18 budget, it was in either 16 or 17, but that did get reduced to zero. So there was a time when there was funding kind of identified on the front end of the budget and during the development, that you had put in the budget to do exactly what you're saying. Overhire, be able to have funding for that separation, but bring someone in, right away in all departments. So that is something we can look at while we're going through budget discussions as, how does that balance with your other priorities that you want?
Thank you.
Any other comments of Gene? Stay there just a minute if you would, Chief. Tomorrow afternoon, and I guess I'm revealing this to the public certainly, and perhaps to some of our aldermen here, we're going to be posting the agenda items for next week's Committee of the Whole and our City Council meeting. As much as I'd like to talk about meeting logistics, and this council has heard me talk about that, we are responding to something that we feel is important enough to devote an entire Committee of the Whole meeting, and that will be in the administrative hearing process that has blown up social media here over the past week. We want to see what the judiciary has asked this city to do, what our legal team has advised us is best for our community, and you've been part and parcel of that in a major way. So I don't ask you to make any comment tonight unless you'd like to, but I'd like the public to know that you and how the police department in the city of DeKalb is going to be integrally involved in that projected switchover for our, what we call our Monday morning court call. I want them to know that you will be here on Monday to address any particular questions.
Yes, I will, and I would just briefly say that, and I know there's a lot of questions out in the community. The situation has just arisen that the courts have decided not to utilize the ordinance violation court in the manner that has traditionally been here literally for decades. And the manner in which the recourse we have is for enforcement would simply be if someone decides they're going to contest something or not pay a fine, is file a small claims consideration. We do not have the resources to go down that road. I mean, the option would be don't arrest people for ordinance violations. And that ordinance violation is so important because it is a lower level sanction that often solves a problem without somebody going to jail. It's a wake-up call, especially in a community that hosts a university, for a minor offense that doesn't have to go on a criminal history. Going to the administrative court process will even decrease that, but it will give us the options of taking someone who is non-compliant and putting them into the iDrop system through the state of Illinois for a collections option, using a reputable collections company. In this whole process, the fear of using administrative court as some type of financial engine, I just don't see it. Our ticket numbers stay the same. The one area where will increase, I believe, in a fairly large amount will be parking, because we have parking enforcement folks out there now that we haven't had for years. So I think you'll see it there. I don't suspect to see a lot of changes, and based on the leadership of the council and internally at the police department, you're not going to have a Ferguson develop here. That's not even close to happening. And the safeguard to that is we're working in concert with the judiciary.
Absolutely.
We're working in concert with the state's attorney's office. It's all been above board and in plain view. Next Committee of the Whole will be even more in plain view, and there may be some things we learn during that process that will help us change and shift gears a little bit. But I can assure you that we're doing the best we can with the cards we've been dealt.
And I felt tonight, not to elongate this meeting, if you will, but I felt it very appropriate to mention the fact that this city has responded to what we feel is an important enough subject that we're going to devote an entire committee of the whole meeting on Monday night. And I trust you'll be here, Gene.
I will, sir.
Okay? Thank you. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. Okay, Mark, our information technology, Mark Thorson, to speak to his line item review.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Going over the line item review for the IT budget, in similar fashion, we received a notice from finance giving us an idea of where our budget lies. Overall, we're at around 28%, where we should be trending about 33%. So I think we're doing a good job with keeping an eye on things and doing the best we can with what we have. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have on our budget.
The mayor thinks I've died.
Alderman Fagan.
Mark, question just jumped out. I mean, when I was quick looking at it right away was, from 2017 to 2018, your overtime more than doubled that you budgeted for.
Correct.
And what was that reasoning?
Mainly due to on-call status to help support the police department. We're obligated contractually, if we have anyone that's a union position on call, to provide them with a certain amount of money every day that they're on call. And that goes towards if they're called in to service. We have that for 2 of our employees. We have 4 of us all 4 of us are on a rotation.
Okay.
And that's a service, Alderman Fagan, that we never provided the police department before. In hearing both chiefs talk about how they desperately need IT infrastructure and services, and with Mark coming on board, he put together an on-call, and we're actually utilizing the resource of an on-call process through the collective bargaining agreement with AFSCME to be able to provide those after-hour support for public safety. You know, we had some very clear, close calls on where we would have had some extremely valuable, important data lost due to technology glitches. And now that we have that on-call in place, we're able to quickly respond and have someone available to serve public safety after hours.
Right. I get that.
Anything else? Any other questions or comments of our IT director, Mark Thorson? Mark, you know, we all know that technology changes so quickly, and that trend continues to be very prevalent. Before the meeting tonight, I walked back into the control room, and based on the fact that we've had what I would consider a litany of complaints over the past year regarding blackouts on Channel 14, the loss of sound on Channel 14, et cetera, the YouTube scenario, which I think has been solved now. But I find out that this equipment is 15, 20 years old. And you know, Channel 14, YouTube and all that continues to be a very good way of expanding our visibility, as does the planned upgrades on our website. Can you just give us a little executive summary, if you will, of where we are in terms of equipment for our electronic transmission of information and where we are on the website upgrade?
Absolutely. So your first question on the technology, you're absolutely correct. There's quite a bit of equipment in this room that is pushing over 12 years old. Okay. And we've been attempting to do this through the general fund by replacing what we can that we felt was most impactful up front, and then we can start working backwards from there. We hit a point where we feel we're going to have to put some money towards this, and we wanted to bring that before the council in a planned manner, not just come to you with issues, and, we wanted to make sure we had options and availability for you. So we're building that plan. I've been working with, now it's up to 3 contractors trying to get different pricing, different ideas, get different perspectives to find out, because it's been made clear to me since I came on board from the community and from the council that this is an important piece that we want to continue. So I'm trying to look for ways to be able to afford this and offset some of the burden off of the general fund in some way, shape, or form. So I'm working with legal, with the city manager's office, with finance, on that side of it to develop a plan that I want to be able to come to you with and bring that. That's going to be brought to you shortly. It's just I don't have an exact date just yet. So.
And Mayor, Mark and I have had numerous conversations, and he's expressed the concerns of the aging technology for, the Channel 14. And, he and I have talked about this. We can't, he doesn't have a budget to replace all the equipment.
Yeah.
So this plan was a result of our numerous discussions of, well, let's present it to the council. If we can go over budget, with council's approval, we'll do that. If not, it's going to have to compete against all other priorities during the FY19 budget process. So we will be coming with those options soon, as Mark has been working very hard on that. But we've identified the critical need. Mark is honestly, embarrassed by the technical glitches, but he's working with aged equipment that will happen.
No, I understand. I'm not trying to be critical. I did not bring this up at this point with any criticism in mind, other than the fact that, hey, these are things that we as aldermen and we as the mayor's office hear. So I appreciate your candor on that. What about the website upgrade?
So we are entitled to a website upgrade as of February 2019. However, the goal is to start that approximately 6 months prior to that. And I'm working with you in your office to be able, and the city manager's office, to be able to come up with a plan that not only addresses the transition to an updated design and features, but also a way to encompass public participation, to be able to grasp that as well. So once we've finalized that draft, we'll be able to present that publicly and get that moving.
Good. We talk about business friendly, now we're talking about user friendly, so.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely.
Any other comments? Yes, Alderman Verbeek.
With the amount of input we've received on the website, would council support perhaps a quick gathering of interested community members to voice some input on what they would like to see from the website?
That is going to occur.
Okay.
We're putting together a committee, a task force, something. It's going to be very community involved and engaging, because it is the community's website, and we want to know what should we be focusing on to improve. And we've been collecting much feedback since the implementation of the current website. So in addition to those items that we haven't been able to address such far, absolutely that's going to be critical. And Mark has been in conversations with the mayor on how that committee, that team will be formed.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Finally, the last item on our agenda tonight is the fiscal year 2019 Financial Policies Finance Advisory Committee recommendations, and once again, Molly Talkington.
Well, good evening again. I didn't do a presentation for this because you have everything as attachments of the financial policies. So what occurred is, every year we look at your financial policies as part of the budget process. Typically that's done when we are doing kind of the late summer, fall look at the budget. So we had a chance to look at it earlier this year, and I met with the Finance Advisory Committee, and we went over different changes that we'd like to see to the financial policies. A lot of the recommendations through the policies are kind of grammar or formatting changes, but in the attachments, they're all attached in track changes so you can see where that occurs. But we went through and everything was voted on from the Financial Advisory Committee, and so their recommendations are included in the report. So I figure we'll just start with the first report, and it's probably the easiest for you to look at the attachments. So if we have questions, we can look at those as we look at the attachments. So the first policy, and I did not do them in policy number order, I did them in the order that the FAC had looked at. The policies is your capital equipment replacement fund policy, so that's your attachment A. And the revisions to this policy is, well, one, to add policy to the name of this policy, and then two, it was really to do some of those grammatical changes, but it was also to specifically note that vehicles are included when we're talking about capital equipment. There was some confusion that I found during the year on that, and that to remove our references to the proprietary software that's in place, because the policy should really be written flexible enough that it doesn't matter what software we're using, but intended for us to be able to still do that policy. So I took some of those proprietary references and made them a little more general for this policy. So were there any questions on this policy? Okay, so the attachment B is the accounting, auditing, and financial reporting policy. Again, the revisions on here were mainly to remove procedural steps that are reflective of the current software and are heavily manual, and to try to bring that shift to show that we're going to do it with the new ERP system, and to have the policy be a little bit more general, that can apply to any system going forward. And that is the bulk of the changes in this policy. So is there any questions to the accounting audit policy? Okay. On to attachment C is our capital asset policy. The revisions here, again, were similar to the accounting and auditing policy to reflect the removal of the heavily manual procedures and put it back towards reflecting the new software implementation. Is there any questions on those changes? Okay. Attachment D is our investment policy. This is a little different. It's not reflective of the software. The changes in here really were to reflect a change in procedure that is happening in the finance department. We used to have a position which was like the senior accountant, had a few title changes throughout the years. We no longer have that position. And due to workload, there's been two kind of points within this policy that as a department we haven't absorbed into another position and haven't been reporting on. They're very technical in nature. So it removes the inception to date yields for as reporting to council. And I don't think, one, they're very technical. The inception to yields information is not easy to understand if you're not in the finance realm, right? It's not the easiest information to gather when you're reading a report, but there is still a portion of the policy that still reflects performance standards, and that's really what that inception to yields is trying to show you. There's some performance standards of what we've invested on. So we still keep the section 6.4, which says that the portfolio will be managed in accordance with the parameters specified within the policy. It should attempt to obtain comparable rate of return during the market economic environment of stable interest rates, and the portfolio performance should be benchmarked to the return of the 90-day Treasury bill. So we still have benchmarks in place within this policy. So it's really removing the two that we haven't been able to incorporate into our current workload. So are there any questions on this one? Okay. Attachment E. This is your budget policy. The revisions to this policy, and I'll, is one to reflect the fund balance policy changes in the next one that we'll discuss, but also to reflect that the Finance Advisory Committee's name is correct, you know, that kind of formatting grammar change, but also to add language to ensure that the budget is being reconciled and that there is a remediation in place if something happens. So in discussion at the committee, what this was really about is if sales tax, if we know a current business is no longer in business, if that would affect that current year budget significantly, do we have something in place where we look at our revenues And if it is such a major impact, do we make a change? So the reaction or the remediation could be we wait and see because maybe we don't have enough months' data, or we keep the budget the way it is because whatever the change was doesn't materially affect what we had budgeted, so we can keep it in place, or we make a significant revision. So I know when I was at the city of Champaign, we had snow on multiple weekends leading up to Christmas. It took our sales tax down significantly, so we did make a change because that did have an immediate impact. So that's what this change is, to make sure we're looking, and if something needs to be changed, we come to council sooner than later to make those changes. So those are the changes to this policy. Is there any questions on this one? Yes.
Yes, Alderman Noriko.
When you say that if there's a change in circumstance and you recognize, finance recognizes that, and you take a look at the options, council would only know if the determination was to actually make a change in the budget amount. In other words, if you decide, well, you know, we really need 3 more months of data, we won't get any notification?
So you actually now have a report you receive monthly.
Yeah.
That year-to-date report that comes on the second meeting of the month. That will give you the indication of those trends. I've been looking at how to make that report a little bit more user-friendly. That does give you some indication there. I would say it's that report, if we wanted to make a big, you know, if something happened where I felt we needed to come back to you and make a change to the budget, that report would come off of consent agenda into
okay.
as
That
an
makes
action
sense.
item. So if as long as it's on consent, we're monitoring, we're still looking, you know, forward. We're watching kind of all the balls in the air, but we don't recommend any change at that time. But if we do recommend a change, that'll come off of consent for you guys to take action on something.
Alderman
Okay,
Fagan.
thank you.
Yeah, and that, we have to take the responsibility on that, and something like that happened. It comes to my mind as the city of Batavia when Sam's Club closed up earlier this year, and they had to revise their budget.
Correct.
So, I mean, we should be looking at those items.
That was my question too, Pat, is what is a major event? Is it a closure of a couple of, you know, of stores in your community?
Well, I think that would be
Yeah.
brought up that, I think somebody like Molly would say, hey, you know what, this is going to put an impact on us. And so I think it would be up to the collaboration between city council and finance department.
Right.
Right, and so you have had a major business close this year. But in looking at how their sales comes in and how it trends, I have not recommended any change to your sales tax budget because we received probably their heaviest months, right? Those December sales come into
Yeah.
the current year. That, I don't think that'll affect the current year as much. But when we look at the 19 budget, that will be a factor we start discussing. So you do have some things that are changing here and there, but in that case, I don't recommend changing right now. But you're right, if Sam's Club, if we had a Sam's Club and it closed right away, or it closed at a point where we didn't capture the large sales months, that would be a different kind of outcome that we would do.
Alderman Fanouken.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand it, because it looks like there's a little change in the timeline on this, and again in the new section 13, so that when you become aware that a budget amendment is going to need to be made, you're going to inform us, say via email or whatever, and then you'll go through and do the documents, and then at a later date, City Council will actually approve that budget amendment. Is that how I'm reading this correctly or not?
Mostly. I don't know that I will send an email to council at every instance if it's not a major change.
Well,
But
I'm just
otherwise
saying
you
when
will
it
be.
is a budget amendment being required, because we don't do that many of them over the course of the
Right.
year. And that's what I'm saying. It's just on the ones where you're fairly certain that a budget amendment's going to need to be made, whether it's because of an increased cost to something or something like that, so that those are the times that we'll get that advance notice, other than
Correct.
just in the monthly reports.
Yes.
Okay.
And on here, the policy does say quarterly, but because we do those reports monthly, that's really where I intend to, you know, make any changes is with those monthly reports. So we don't have to wait for the quarter either.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments on our financial policies? I think you have one more, don't you, there?
I have two more.
Two more, okay.
Or, no, three. So the next one's really the one that has the biggest, most significant changes for us to talk about, and that is your fund balance policy. So in here, it includes, of course, some formatting and grammar changes, but the biggest change is the general fund unassigned balance kind of calculation, that threshold we talk about. Right now, policy is that all expenditures, you will have 25% of those expenditures in your fund balance, unassigned balance. That's about $9 million right now for what we have in the general fund. But when we get back to talking about police and fire pensions and IMRF and how you have, in some of the other policies, a preference or that priority that police and fire and IMRF are kind of your first major items funded by your property tax levy. There is a very kind of stable revenue source in the property tax levy, which is part of this is reiterated through when we went through the Moody's bond rating, and that we need to find a stable source to fund those police and fire and IMRF pensions. So what we have been doing is we funded to a point. So last year we funded most of police and fire through the property tax levy. There was about $500,000 that we did through other general fund sources, and we moved all of IMRF to general fund. Every single dollar of those pension funds require a 25% portion to be put into your unassigned fund balance. That becomes part of this kind of problem we keep seeing. We increase our expenditures and we offset it with revenue, but we don't offset it with 125% revenue. We never kind of fully capture that fund balance part you have in place. So with the pensions, you're funding that portion, I think it was like 93% of police and fire pension through the property tax levy. But your current requirement is now we have to find 25% of that portion through other revenue sources as well. So you haven't just shifted the 500,000 plus that 25%. You still need to find 25% for that initial amount you funded through tax levy. So what I've worked with FAC, really with Chair Peddle, to talk through different scenarios, and then we went through this with FAC, is to put more emphasis on, and it really helps, I think, to get to what the bond ratings was after, is if you use property tax levy to fund your pensions, or whatever you use the tax levy to fund, we will offset what you need in the unassigned fund balance for that revenue only. But I increased the percentage for everything else, so your current balance is about 9.3 million. The calculation, if you do 30% of all expenditures minus your property tax revenue, if you go from 25% to 30%, it gets you to that very similar 9.3 million. So we're keeping that same threshold dollar-wise in the general fund, but you're kind of giving yourself a relief valve for anything you have in the property tax levy, because it's a very stable revenue source. So anything you shift to other general fund revenues, you're saying I'm shifting to more volatile revenues, right, that are more reactive to the economy. And so we're going to find more money to put in that unassigned balance to account for those. So in the end, the dollar amount for the general fund's the same. It's how you're treating your revenue sources and the emphasis you have on tax levy as a stable revenue versus everything else as more volatile in nature. And part of this is, I think, is, for me, is trying to address Moody's and their, for us to put more emphasis on a stable revenue source. So by increasing that threshold for the ones that are not property tax, you're helping, put more into your fund balance there, and I think it gives a little bit more support to what we saw in the last bond rating, that we're trying to be more fiscally stable, be conservative, and really address those revenues that are not what are considered the most stable, right, of property tax levy.
Any comments on
I'm sure.
that one?
Molly, excuse me.
Yeah.
Molly, do you think you could, like, use some real numbers to help
Yes.
everybody up here understand that?
No,
I
that's
think
fine.
that would be
I
most
put-
helpful.
I put an example in here on purpose. So let's say your increase is $600,000 in police and fire pension. And so your current calculation is you will need to find $150,000 to put into the unassigned fund balance. Doesn't matter what revenue source you're using for that increase. Now, if, under the new scenario, if you funded the $600,000 through the property tax revenue, you do not need to find $150,000 from other revenue sources to put into the fund balance. However, if you choose to fund the $600,000 through other revenue sources, so not property tax, you now have to find $180,000 to put into the fund balance reserve.
30%.
So there's no addition to the fund balance reserve if you use property tax levy because you're acknowledging it's a stable revenue source. We receive almost 95-96% of that revenue annually.
So it's the stability.
It's the stability of
Yeah,
that
okay.
source. So we're not affecting other services to find another $150,000 to put in fund balance when you've already clearly acknowledged, I'm going to fund it through this stable revenue source. The flip side is, if you want to do it without property tax levy and use sales tax or our other mechanisms that we have, you now need to find $180,000 to put into that fund balance because you're acknowledging the fact that they're not as stable, right? That they are not consistently 95% and above received, that we, one snow event can drastically, affect your sales tax. So by having that additional $30,000 in fund balance, it will help you weather the storm a little bit better because that's what your fund balance reserve is. It acknowledges that these are less stable revenues, so we're going to put more aside for those. This is a very stable revenue, so we're not going to put 25% aside.
Any further? Alderman Jacobson.
I mean, the one fear I have in that is it creates an opportunity for future staffs to basically raise property taxes quicker, faster, harder to get the dollars they need and not have any real impact from it. The artificial restriction was placed on those dollars, again, as a further check to increasing those tax values too quickly, and saying, if you do that, realize that more money is going to have to come out of operations. I understand that that's what's happening. It was done intentionally so when we put that 25% fund balance in as a further check to outrageous property tax increases each year, because it wasn't just the residents that were giving up, it was effectively the staff that was going to have to give up some of their operating revenue to help artificially create a barrier to raise those taxes.
Any further comment? Okay.
Still. So, okay. So now it's 30%, sorry.
Yeah, Alderman Mark Ward, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it in another way. So the fund balance is minus the property tax revenue and expenditures, theoretically, and becomes 30%.
So I was targeting the same dollar amount. So right now you have $9.4 million in your fund balance as part of the adoption for the FY18 budget at 25%. Now I rounded up to 30% because saying 29.2%. Or 7%. So rounding up to 30%, it keeps your fund balance dollar amount relatively the same. So it goes to 9.5 million because I rounded up to 30%, but the goal of changing that percentage was so that dollar amount that we have in unassigned fund balance right now would not decrease. So if you left it at 25%, it would have decreased because we took a big chunk out with the property tax revenue you have right now. So this maintains that $9.4 million you already have set aside in your unassigned fund balance.
Alderman Jacobson.
Again, I guess the next question to that is, does it change available revenues for next year? Is it a one-time shot in the arm, being that we're basically capping that at the 2.4 or at the 9.4? Is that the effort here, is to create a short-term, one-time, couple $100,000 addition to the general fund, or is it going to be flat because of that 30%?
I think it'll be flat because of the 30%. If we went with the same, nothing changed from the 18 budget to 19 budget, then
Would have been $300,000 or $400,000.
it would have been this, well, actually it would have gone up $84,000 because of the rounding. But essentially, that's the goal, that you're not going to be losing where you've already, built up in that fund balance. We'll keep that the same, but then you're not struggling, if you choose to use property tax levy, to find this additional funding through your other sources for something that we know is very stable. It comes in frequent, when we get it, it comes in on time, that it's, if there is a major change in the economic environment, we have about 3 years to react to it. So it gives you time to plan, address it, using property tax funding. But on the flip side, if you don't use property tax funding and you want to increase things through those taxes, there is going to be a higher requirement to put into that fund balance, because we know those revenues react faster to the economy. And I think it'll build a better cushion for us to look to if something were to happen that would negatively affect where we are with those revenues specifically.
Are we satisfied that we've heard enough about that attachment? Let's move to attachment G.
No, I'm not.
You are not? Okay.
I'm trying to get real numbers here. So last year, our pension payments, or for the budget this year, I guess maybe is where I really want to say this, is I'm looking in the general fund, we're roughly $5 million of property tax revenue for the pension, correct?
It was $6 million was the revenue.
6, all right. So
But the
then,
payment, the expenditure was a little higher. So the only,
right, but just
Yeah.
let me,
Okay.
that'll just help me do it. So like, let's just use the $36 million general fund budget to make this easy. So then if we take the 6 million out, so at 36 million, we have a $9 million balance. If we take the 6 million out, we now have a $30 million balance, and that would still be about the $9 million. So now I'm understanding it better because of using some real numbers here helps me get that. Mike, does that help you? Yes, no?
It does. I'm understanding,
Yeah.
because you're at 30 and then a quarter of that. But
Well-
not really a quarter, you need a 30 of that.
Well, no, at 36, it's a quarter equals 9 million. At 30 million, it's 30%. Then it stays at 9 million. I think that's where Molly's trying to lead us to. And now using the numbers and understanding that, I think I understand it a little bit better, and hopefully that's helped. Pardon?
I would go to 10.
What would go to 10?
9.5 is what it calculated for this one. So he's rounding up a little, so you're right, it would go to 10 million, but if you're just rounding everything up.
Yeah, it's just rounding it to 36 minus the 6 million at 30, so 30% of 30 million is $9 million. So it does match up. Just using general numbers as an example, not to the cent.
Yes, I was math challenged for a moment.
All right.
3 times 3 is 9.
Yeah,
There you go.
all right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Molly.
I apologize.
He's open for tax service, folks.
He's burned out on taxes right now, that's why he's struggling here.
3 times 3. Yeah, okay, yeah. I was taking I was taking a third of 30 million and coming up to 10,
Okay.
and not 30%.
All
Because
right.
I was really rounding.
You were at 33%. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Molly.
Okay. All right.
It's
So
it's those blank stares.
This one wasn't simple, so it's okay.
What are we up to?
This is still something we have to vote on and
Correct. So
come up to things, so.
tonight, I really want your feedback on it. When you adopt the policies, will be part of the budget process. So this is to bring forward what the FEC would like to see. The sooner I have your input, we can make changes if there's revisions you would like to see besides this, or keep it the same. But this will help then me put together the budget, right? So when we're doing the FY19 budget, if we do change to this methodology of the fund balance policy, I need to calculate to that and not the 25%. So any input tonight will help going forward.
When will we be asked to give that approval?
I don't know the date off, but it's built into your schedule, so I would
Okay.
have to look. I'm
But it
sorry.
is somewhere on that matrix of dates that we have that, okay.
Right, and Mayor, this is all in the spirit of planning ahead, getting the information to you, allowing you to, just absorb it, give feedback, so we're not cramped in the fall and late
Right.
year, trying to make not only financial policy decisions, but try to find, money in the budget. So I think Molly has planned out this timeline to
Yes.
meet those proactive needs and have those early discussions.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
The next attachment, attachment G, is your revenue expenditure policy. This is predominantly spelling out acronyms for people who don't know what they are, and that's helpful, I think, in general. But the other part of it, there was one wording change that relates to your point number 1 for the levy for police, fire, and IMRF, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, is that we changed it from said increase will be, or will need to be added to the city's overall previous year levy request to avoid underfunding problems, to said increase may need to be. So that's the only change that wasn't grammatical or spelling out an acronym on there.
Okay?
Sure.
Yes, Alderman Jacobson.
I mean, I guess this would be a perfect time, being that we're on the page that I guess the question I have is on number 3 on the first page of attachment G. Being now that we have a new interim city manager and very shortly, another new interim city manager, at what point, now that we're in the second quarter and halfway through the year, do we have a discussion about how we fund our budget hole for this year?
It's in the schedule. Molly, give us the date.
So at the end of this month, I will have the 5-year financial plan at the Finance Advisory Committee, so that's a June 26th, I believe is the date. Then I can make any changes that they want and adjust. You do have a council meeting on July 10th for budget workshops, so if there's not very many adjustments, I'll bring it to you on July 10th. But if there's major changes, it'll come to you on your August meeting. And that includes a review of the current year, because we can't really forecast out until we go through the current year. So it will have the current year information as well as looking out 5 years.
And what if we find in August that we have a $500,000 or $600,000 funding gap? How do we deal with that with a quarter left in the year?
Well, I'm hoping that we can address it at the first meeting in July and bring the forecast to you then. And then if there is something we need to adjust, you have a little bit more time, but we can look at the same things we've been talking about each time you've kind of got these one-off requests that weren't in the budget. Do you use your fund balance to get through the end of the year? Right? That's really the first question. Do you dip below that 25% target? Council does have, the say on whether or not that happens. Do we look to selling assets, right? We're already working on that to fill in some of your other gaps. Do we look to expenditure reductions? So that are kind of the direction that you would look at. Where do we go? But it'll really be at that July or August meeting, and we can take action right after that to address those needs if there really is one we need to address immediately.
Just worry we're waiting too late in that. being that we're halfway through the fiscal year and we've made some of our major expenditures in the first half, software and those things, I think we're going to be stuck with the option of, well, let's use fund balance this year, and
We have
that
held
would be a
off.
travesty as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's why I asked the question an hour ago, where are we? And that's why I asked her this morning, where are we? And I would hope that this is not going to get into that scenario, Dave. I'm not saying that it won't, but, I mean, your question is well taken.
Right, and we have held off on some purchases, so it was brought up on, I think the last time we talked about the Edgebrook property, that one of the options is to delay the sale of the dump truck and purchase a new one. We're still holding off on that purchase pending these discussions. So there are some things we've done in general to kind of wait and see where we're at before we take action on it. And it's easier to do that with something like a capital purchase. And we've been actively trying to sell the assets. So you got the list, was it last month, to sell off like vehicle assets. And we're working on putting together a property asset listing that they'll have recommendations on what ones we could sell or what you want to do with those. So we're trying to address some of that by holding off on expenditures and looking for ways to bring in revenue we didn't anticipate in the budget.
Not easy. Not easy. Any further comment from anyone?
Okay.
Okay.
So attachment H, this is our debt management policy. This really was updated to reflect the fund balance policy change so that all your policies are consistent. This actually was the current fund balance policy. If we choose not to go down the path of changing to the one that's currently in place in the fund balance policy of the 25% of general fund expenditures, this one actually will need to be revised because this one says 25% of general fund expenditures minus transfers. So there's not a consistency right now between your policies. So at this time, it's reflecting the change to the 30% less the property tax revenue. So if you don't go down that path, then we just do need to update this one to reflect the same language that's used in other policies. And then again, it's several instances of clarifying information for the end user. I think overall, the changes that are in all of these policies don't change the intent of what council was trying to do in the policies. The big one being the fund balance, it's more of a calculation discussion, but the intent is for you to still have the same amount of money in that fund balance that you have today. And to provide clarification for end users that read it, and to update the policies to not reflect those heavy manual process that are currently in place or have the proprietary information, to make it more flexible to the new reality that we're in finance being more electronic.
I may have looked at the alignment I'm going to speak about now a little bit more critically earlier this year, or perhaps late last year, when I looked at what Finance Advisory Committee was suggesting and talking about and what this council was doing. Do you feel that this council and the Finance Advisory Committee are more in line now with one another as in an organizational sense than we may have been a year ago?
I think it's probably...
Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think you're probably in a good place with them in the fact that it's the same kind of issue that council had. We did so much stuff so fast and in a short amount of time, they didn't have time to process, digest information, and give you feedback more holistically or taking time to review it. So this, by having kind of FAC review everything before you and then it comes to you with their recommendations, is providing the avenue for them to, one, get the information earlier, really think about it. We took several meetings to go over these policies, so it wasn't, we did it all in one night plus 6 other things, which is about what we did last year. So I think it's giving them more valuable time to look at what's there and give you more valuable input.
No, Mike, and you've been sort of our staff liaison, our council liaison. What do you think we're in better alignment now?
Yes.
Going into this 2019 process?
Definitely made some progress, yes.
Good. Well, that gives me a level of comfort.
You can go home and sleep.
All right, well, any other questions?
Any other questions of any of the things that we have discussed tonight? It will be a short half week, and yes, Alderman Jacobson.
Not necessarily a question, but a little bit of a frustration.
Okay.
We're into June, 6 months into the year now. And the Finance Advisory Committee for the last 6 months has been working on a document that's effectively grammatical changes at this point. We have so much work to do. And I just feel like we're churning and we're not addressing, again, we're talking now end of July before we start talking about this year's budget shortfall. We're talking, when we look at some of these individual departments, that we're behind in roads and behind in fleets and behind on this building and behind on all the actual responsibilities we have, and we're still not addressing any of those structural deficiencies. We're talking about periods and commas and sentences of a policy that has, to this point thus far, has gotten us in the hole that we're in right now. So, again, at what point does the change come? And that's the question I'm getting from a lot of members in the community. That's what I'm hearing on radio shows from local radio personalities. It's what I'm hearing when I'm out every day in the community is, we know we have problems. We've addressed that we have those problems. We know where a lot of those problems are, and yet there never seems to be an opportunity to have the discussion about how to fix it. A lot of community members assume that would happen at the FAC level. A lot of the FAC members assumed it would be happening at the FAC level. And I'm hearing frustration from them saying, we're spending time debating periods and commas rather than the hundreds of thousands of dollars in gaps we need to be plugging right now.
Well, I hear different things coming from different ends of this table. I hear you saying one thing, I think I hear Alderman Verbeek saying the other. I would ask the question, what would you suggest might be an answer going forward? Alderman Verbeek, yeah.
For example, Dave, could we, again, we mentioned streets. And I've chatted a little bit about this before. Look at 20 years to say, what would it take to catch up to the condition and make the condition of our streets acceptable throughout the community? And then after 20 years, what is that hard line amount each year from there? But again, we would be responsible for figuring out how to pay for that. So what would you suggest from a 20-year view in catching up with road maintenance? What would be your ideas for funding that? Or we're asking FAC for that. Is that what you're getting at?
Again, I appreciate the fact that we're going to see the 5-year forecast in July or so. And some of those numbers will probably come into focus through that process. I would assume several of them will, but not all. Again, in July at this point, we've pushed it back so long. We've asked for these numbers for 2 or 3 or 4 years up here. And I appreciate that there's lots of different places and different roles. But while we're waiting, the community's suffering. The roads are suffering. The budget's not changing. The hole keeps getting bigger. And again, to hear answers like, well, we'll have to decide whether or not to use fund balance this year. That's what I believe the plan has been since last year's budget, since the outgoing city manager passed that budget, to put us in a situation where we have no choice but to say, well, this year we have to sacrifice fund balance. And again, selling a couple vehicles for $1,000 at auction doesn't plug a $600,000 gap. We have major financial worries. If you were in a private business, this would be the first active agenda that you wake up every day to go to work and think about when you're laying in bed at night before you go to sleep, not about the periods and commas in your checkbook. So I just keep hoping we get there, and now we're 6 months into this fiscal, and we still haven't started that effort. So let's see where we go.
Well, I didn't ask the question this morning about where we were 6 months into this thing, because I simply wanted to ask a question. You know, and, I mean, it's our responsibility to work with staff, to respond, as you say, Dave, to those radio personalities, and all the other hosts of folks out there who are asking questions. What is this council going to do? And it is our responsibility. The buck does stop here, yeah.
I do think that we've made a big change since your prior year budget. So the 5-year financial plan is a major undertaking. We began with FAC in January to tweak. Was there more information we needed, like adding the town to normal, because that's probably a really good comparable for us. But gathering all that information and getting data for this current fiscal year that will mean something to project off of and make a difference with is usually that 6-month mark. Trying to project in February when you really only have 1 month of data is very difficult. So part of that is just the timing of when we receive revenues and how it comes in. But in the meantime, we have been bringing items to council where, you know, 912 Edgebrook seems to be the easiest example of, here's something that wasn't in the budget that council wanted to look at. It became a priority, and I've been trying to address in those budget sections with more than just fund balance. Yes, fund balance is usually option one, but we looked at different scenarios on if you were going to proceed with a demo, here's other ways we can do it. So I've been trying to do that as things come up during the year to give you more than just a fund balance option. Of course, the option is, you know, in that case, we've just put the project on hold, so we're not spending any funding on that one right now, but it will come back up for council to talk about. So I've been trying through the year to address some of your 18 issues as they come up on a kind of a singular basis. And all of those things, if we've made decisions during that 6 months, will be reflected in that 5-year plan. I really think the 5-year plan is going to answer a ton of your questions on where we stand, what are we looking at, and what do we need to do immediately in the next year, in the 5 years. It includes stuff for streets. We're working with Public Works for them to update where we're at, because it'll include the 2 cents funding we added for local motor fuel tax. But we know that didn't solve the problem for streets, so we still will have a gap there to look at. But all of that's really in that plan. It's a very comprehensive plan. So I'm trying, my goal is to get it to you as soon as possible, because FAC is going to see it at the end of this month. And if there isn't, major changes from that group, I can have it right back to council. Very similar to some of the other stuff we've done with them. I've tried to turn it around as soon as I can. So I hope that next meeting, when we really look at that 5-year plan, we'll get to all the things that you are kind of waiting on pins and needles for.
Thank you.
I may have punched a small hole in that hornet's nest, and I don't know whether I'm ready to throw that hornet's nest up against that wall. But I'll say this: is it time that we sit down together in a special meeting, knowing that we all like meetings, with Finance Advisory Committee, and jointly say, hey, what can we do together? What are we doing as a council that flies in the face of what you folks want to do? I don't know, Mike, again, you're our liaison. I'm not suggesting you're not doing a great job, and I'm not suggesting that Dave isn't listening to the correct radio personalities. However, if that will, in fact, assist us and assist the residents of this city, is that something that would make sense? Alderman Noriko, thank you.
We've talked about in the past giving Finance Advisory Committee an opportunity to review information digest it, do their work, and then make recommendations to the council. It seems like up to this point, the finance director, now the soon-to-be interim city manager, has been trying to do that. And if Finance Advisory Committee is unhappy with, the material presented to them, or they feel that there are other issues that need to be addressed, they need to take responsibility to either address that with their chair or with Molly. And, for us just at this point to say it isn't working, I'm not so sure about that. Also because, if we do get together, what are we looking at? To get together and say, are you satisfied, are you not satisfied? I don't think that would be useful. I would, at this point, if anything, put some of the burden back on the Finance Advisory Committee. But, perhaps have Molly, talk to the chair and say, okay, this is how we've been operating up to this point. Do we need to add anything? What are you hearing from your committee members? That, I don't want to interject the council into their process at this point.
But we have to interject our process in, our thoughts into their process, Kate, don't we?
Well, but in the past, we had said, we want the Finance Advisory Committee to give, to be able to work and to give recommendations,
Yeah, right.
to the council. So I think we need to let them do that. If there is something that we're concerned that they aren't addressing, fine, bring that to the chair. But to hear that Finance Advisory Committee members aren't satisfied with something, they need to take responsibility and say something to their chair or say something to Molly. While it's useful to talk to an alderman, that isn't addressing the operations of the Finance Advisory Committee.
Alderman Verbeek.
And I haven't heard any issues from Finance Advisory Committee members, but please do contact me if there are issues. Feel free. Thank you.
And I don't know what radio personality you were speaking of, David, but if it's the one over at WLBK, I used to have a show once a month. I hope I still do.
I will say that FEC works to look at the budget, and what they're going to look at in the 5-year plan is really that the 10 goals you, as a council, spent developing, and then the framework of the financial policies to give you recommendations from there. And of course, it's up to the council whether or not you take those recommendations. So you can, use their thought process and decide if that's the way you want to go or not.
I feel so honored and so privileged to work with a talented group of people up here 2, 3, 4, 5 times a month. And what I'm simply trying to say tonight is, hey, we're all in this together. And if that means we bring an advisory committee to sit down with us in a public venue and talk about things that will not only clear the air, but will make it more clear to the residents of the city of DeKalb that we take finance very, very seriously. Okay? So that was my only reason to make that suggestion. Any other? Yes, we do have more comments. Alderman Verbeek.
And if there are other marching orders that council would suggest to the Finance Advisory Committee, we should bring that. And see if we have consensus on what those marching orders are. And then allow them to figure out how to get to that.
And
Any-
Mayor, I would just add one more thing. If there's any changes to the timeline that council wants to see of what FAC should be working on, what we should be working on with you and when, that is fluid. Please let us know and we will adjust.
Molly may have gotten that idea already, right?
So, I mean, please be,
Yeah, yeah.
just let us know what you want us to change, what you want us to move around. I mean, we put that schedule together initially at the beginning of the year and brought it forward to council, and we got consensus that that schedule was acceptable, and that's what we've been working with. But if it's no longer acceptable, we need to know ASAP so we can adjust the FAC's priorities and staff's priorities to meet your needs.
Yeah. Well, again, what was acceptable 3 months ago or 6 months ago may change. We tweak things.
Absolutely, just let us know so we can meet the needs.
Thank you, Molly.
One other thing, Mayor.
Yeah, sure.
Next meeting for the budget workshop. We have on the 19th.
Right. I have another commitment on the 19th, on the 19th, and I'd like to suggest a consideration by the city council to change that to the 18th, which is on a Monday night, the night before. We've been normally meeting on Mondays. Would that be something that would work?
Doesn't work for me.
Here.
David? Bill?
I'd prefer not, but if we
Okay.
have to, we have to.
What about you, Mike? The 18th instead of the 19th?
Yeah, it'd probably work.
Okay. Yeah, if we could do that, I'd appreciate it. Not that I'd have to be here, so if we can't do it, we can't do it.
6:30 again? Or 5 o'clock, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
5 o'clock
Just
again.
5 o'clock.
I have 6:30 here in my calendar that
When
night.
you arrive, Dave, no.
When I show up.
5 o'clock on that Monday then, the 18th.
Okay.
Can we do that?
Yes,
Okay.
we will make that change, Mayor.
I beg your pardon?
We will make that change to the schedule.
Thank you.
That's all for me, unless you guys
Okay.
have more questions.
Okay. Are there any other things, items for the good of the cause during this committee of the whole meeting? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.